Berlin briefing time in a week that is rewriting the power dynamics not only in the Middle East as we record this. Israel and Iran continue to exchange fire. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Israel is currently doing the, and I quote, dirty work for us all by taking on the Iranian Mullah regime. On Thursday morning, Berlin time, the question hanging in the air is how involved US President Donald Trump is willing to become and what say the Europeans have in all of this. The man uniquely qualified to tell us what we're seeing unfold beyond the explosions is with me in the studio today. John Bolton was Donald Trump's national security advisor for a large chunk of his first term, infamous for his hawkish take on US power politics. He's also the author of Surrender is Not an Option and The Room Where It Happened. And also joining me in the studio is Nina Haase, our chief political correspondent. And down the line from Japan, we have with us Richard Walker, DW's chief international editor. First of all, I want us all to look at a statement by Donald Trump on what is currently happening. And the question put to him is whether he will let the US get involved in the conflict in Iran.
You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question? Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction.
John Bolton, things are unfolding fast. First of all, I want to ask you, as his former advisor, who then left the White House, what is going on in his mind? Is he really undecided as he says this?
Yes, I don't think he knows what to do as of the moment we speak. And he doesn't like to be in these kinds of situations where he has to make a choice that he can't reverse the next day. He'd much rather have room to maneuver. And he currently believes, I think, that if he threatens the use of force, that this will finally induce the Ayatollahs to be serious about negotiating the end of the nuclear weapons program. He's wrong on that because they're not going to negotiate the end of the program. I think really the Ayatollahs are waiting to see if this is a taco moment. The Trump chickens always chickens out line. And so he's waiting for them and they're waiting for him. I would have joined the Israelis in the attack initially and probably would have done it 20 years ago.
Yes, in fact, 20 years ago, you already were calling for a preemptive strike on Iran. But Donald Trump is not alone. He has advisors. He used to have you as an advisor. So just give us an idea of what is currently going on in the White House.
Well, because of what Trump has done in the second term to try and surround himself with yes men and yes women, and what he's done to destroy the National Security Council decision-making process, it's even more chaotic now, I think, than it was in the first term. And his advisors are not so much trying to give him advice as guess where he's going to be and get there first. So it really does what Donald Trump most enjoys in the world, which is puts him at the center of everybody's attention.
So when he gets asked by journalists, you believe he genuinely is still to make a decision, varying between he could involve U.S. forces directly. They're already assisting Israel at this moment, as we're recording this on Thursday. He could hand over this very unique bunker-busting bomb that could hit sites deep underground, particularly that nuclear facility. Or he could also just enable Israel to drop that bomb by handing over these specific B-2 bombers. So within that range, give us a prediction that could already be overtaken by time.
Well, I really don't think he's made his mind up. If contrary to all past experience, the Iranians did come forward to negotiate, he might seize the opportunity. He says they're desperate to negotiate. Well, of course they are. Since October the 7th, 2023, Israel has flattened the terrorist surrogates. The Assad regime has been overthrown. Israel itself has destroyed Iran's ballistic missile production facilities. It started the systematic destruction of the nuclear program. It has decapitated the top of the Iranian security forces' decision-making and inflicted considerable other damage. So, of course, the Iranians want to negotiate. That's what they've done for 25 years. They've strung the West out. And that's why Chancellor Merz is exactly right. Israel's doing the work of the West that we should have done a long time ago. What Trump would like in a perfect world is to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Why? Because Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize and didn't deserve it. And Trump's right about that point. Obama didn't deserve it. He hadn't done anything in his first year as president to deserve it. Trump tried to bring a ceasefire to the Russia-Ukraine war and failed. He tried to put himself as the key actor in the recent uptick in violence between Pakistan and India. That didn't work. So now he's hoping if he can bring an end to the Iranian nuclear program, he'll get the Nobel Peace Prize. Failing that, he may use bunker busters against Fordo. I don't think he'll turn them over to the Israelis. That's why this is a truly consequential decision, that it will be Americans who do it because we have the B-2s. And the question then is what else he might do in addition to that. And that decision, I think, is not made. The decision that would be easy to make, although we hope it doesn't happen, is if the Iranians are foolish enough to attack American deployed forces or civilian targets like embassies or consulates in the Middle East, or resume their terrorist attacks against President and former U.S. officials, then I think he would respond as any American president would have to do, very forcefully.
How high is the risk of false flag operations? That would suggest something like that.
False flag operations by the Iranians?
Well, yeah, whoever would have an interest.
Well, I think we would know who it was, where the attacks were coming from, and if that were the case, would respond accordingly. I also think if the Iranians, again, contrary to their own interest, attack the oil infrastructure of the Gulf Arab countries, I think we would come to their defense as well.
And can I just ask, Ambassador, you say that Donald Trump essentially has to pick a side, right, between joining those who say we still need to negotiate with the Iranians, and that is also the Europeans, or sending the bunker busters or using them to help Israel in those military efforts. Do you think Donald Trump is going to join the Europeans when they meet with the Iranian foreign minister in Geneva on Friday?
I think there's zero chance of that. I think the European effort will not succeed. There's no point for the Iranians to negotiate with the Europeans. The Europeans don't pose any threat.
I would just like to ask you specifically what you would advise Donald Trump to do if you were still in that seat. Because, of course, there's also the option that the U.S. could, for example, help the Israelis by refueling, the planes that have to go a long way if they want to hit Iranian territory. Is that categorized as being operationally involved? Would that be an option for Donald Trump to send planes to...
Sure. I think he has a long range of options. The one that makes a difference is the deployment of B-2s to deliver the bunker busters to destroy Fordo with certainty and to finish off Natanz with certainty. Trump didn't want to be involved in the first term. He would have been happy to leave it to Israel. It's more complicated now. My advice would have been to join with the Israelis at the beginning. That's not where Trump was, notwithstanding that he has, and some of his supporters have said he pulled off this careful duplicity against the Iranians to set them up to be surprised by an Israeli attack. That's simply not true. That's typical Trump post facto rationalization. I was actually in charge the whole time. It's not true. The first statement made by Marco Rubio last Thursday was this is a unilateral Israeli action. And there wasn't even a statement of general support by the U.S. for Israel. Very unusual. I don't think Rubio, based on his record in the Senate, would have put out such a statement unless Trump had directed it that way. Because that's what he wanted, hands off, not my thing. Except the next morning, it looked like Netanyahu was actually having some success. So out comes Trump with a statement, I support the Israelis. They're doing excellent work. The stock market will go up. He wants to be on the winning side. He wants to be at the head of the parade. He just doesn't know which direction the parade is going in.
And you said that he doesn't want to see Benjamin Netanyahu on the cover of Time magazine by himself. He wants to play a role, right?
Who's the central figure in the world? Well, Donald Trump. Ask him. He'd be happy to tell you. And he doesn't. This is one reason his relationship with Netanyahu is more complicated, that Netanyahu is an astoundingly significant politician at getting attention, maybe even better than Donald Trump, and Trump can't stand being number two.
And he has a long-term strategy. So are you saying that at this moment in time, he's still going from moment to moment?
That's how he plays. Again, his supporters say he plays three-dimensional chess. It's all very complicated. I want to tell you, he plays chess one move at a time, and I mean one move at a time.
Okay, let's just take a listen to the clip from Friedrich Merz at the G7, because as we record this, we are between that G7 meeting where Donald Trump left early and a very important key NATO summit coming up. Let's just take a listen to Friedrich Merz.
This is the dirty work that Israel does for all of us. We are impacted by this regime as well. This Mullah regime has brought death and destruction to the world through attacks, murder and manslaughter, through Hezbollah, through Hamas on October 7th, 2023 in Israel. This would never have been possible without the regime in Tehran. The supply of drones to Russia from Tehran. Yes, dirty work that Israel did there.
So, dirty work, the German Chancellor says. I want to bring in Richard Walker, our chief international editor, who's traveling with the German president in Japan. And Japan, of course, dissented from that take by most G7 countries. Fill us in on that, Richard.
Yeah, well, Michaela, I mean, so obviously there was a statement from the G7, but the Japanese going into the G7 beforehand had put out their own statement saying that they condemned the strikes by the Israelis and calling for, a return to talks and not disrupting things. And I think you can connect that to a few factors in the Japanese relationship with Iran, partly that goes back a long way, that Japan was actually for a long time a big importer of Iran, then going back to, which ended pretty abruptly during the Trump administration, when the Trump administration was pulling out of the JCPOA after the original Iran deal. So, of course, Ambassador Bolton, was part of that. But the Japanese also, they feel very, very vulnerable in this situation. So they get important 95% of their fossil fuels from the Middle East. So they see a huge kind of precariousness there. So they were very anxious about things spinning out of control. They remain very anxious about things spinning out of control.
So, particularly the JCPOA, you were against that, Ambassador Bolton. You were always in favour of also using US military might as a diplomatic tool. Where will be the limits here? And I just want to play Jordan's foreign minister, who was in Berlin, who was basically sending this warning.
We want to be clear. The whole region is staring into the abyss, faces a big escalation. We have seen Israel's war on Gaza for 1.5 years. A continuous escalation of humanitarian suffering. Everyone, the United Nations and all organizations refer to international law. That is our frame of reference.
This is taking attention away from Gaza. He is insisting on international law as a frame of reference. Is that being eroded in real time here?
Well, I could say a lot about this, but let's say first what the Gulf Arabs are saying publicly. They are all criticizing the Israeli attack. In private, they are all saying, I hope to God they destroy the nuclear program and the Iranians don't attack us. They want what every other person wants, the best of both possible worlds. We don't know the outcome. The question here is, what is your propensity to accept the risk of a nuclear weapons-equipped Iran? My propensity for risk is 0. And I think that's the Israeli propensity for risk. It's very easy for others to say we're willing to accept the risk. And if life were risk-free, that would be a potential outcome. The issue is whether Israel can act in self-defense without waiting to be hit first, or without waiting to the very last minute with an absolute certainty that it's going to be hit. I don't think international law requires it. If it does, then I would disregard it.
Well, some are making the argument that you yourself, in opting out of several treaties, laid the groundwork for this happening. And I know that Richard has a question on this.
So, I mean, it's great to talk to you at this point in this situation, Ambassador Bolton, because also, you know, traveling with Frank-Walter Steinmeier here, I mean, you'll remember he was the German foreign minister during much of the negotiations of the JCPOA. And, you know, I asked him about this yesterday. You know, do you feel that, you know, this is all a mess that goes back to abandoning the JCPOA? He wouldn't say publicly such a thing in as many words, you know, but he did point out how much effort had gone into that Iran deal originally. And I think there is a certain amount of regret you certainly feel among many European powers, thinking, you know, that is, you know, was a major error by the Trump administration. I'd love to hear your response on that, but also I'd like to kind of ask a broader question, which is, I know that you've been a long-term critic of arms control more broadly, and were involved in, you know, leaving the ABM treaty, leaving the INF treaty.
Some of my happiest moments.
The end of the new. Now, with the end of the New START treaty coming up, obviously about, you know, the world entering into, or particularly the three great nuclear powers entering into an arms race. I mean, do you think that is an arms race that the Americans simply have to embrace now? Or are there any measures in terms of arms control that you think would be worth testing out under those new situations?
Well, let's do strategic arms control first, then the JCPOA. The first question is whether you think the party on the other side abides by the agreement. And the lesson of history is the Soviet Union and the Russians did not abide by the agreement. I was against New START in 2010 when the Obama administration signed it. It was deficient in many respects then. It's gotten more deficient as time has gone by. The technology has bypassed it, and we are now a lot more vulnerable from things like hypersonic cruise missiles than we are from ballistic missiles. Same was true with the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which I also helped get the United States out of. And this is a good example of arms control as a panacea. People say, oh, it keeps us safe. It doesn't keep us safe. Let's look at the INF and what it did. It was a treaty between two countries. It meant that only two countries were bound by it, and every other country in the world was free to build intermediate-range missiles. China did, Iran did, North Korea did. Who's more vulnerable now? And then we found out conclusively, beginning in the Obama administration, that Russia was violating the INF treaty. So that meant up until the time we withdrew, there was one country in the world bound by the INF treaty, the United States. That's ridiculous, so we withdrew from it. All right, now let's take the JCPOA. This is another treaty that gives people a warm and fuzzy feeling, but it made the fundamental mistake of allowing Iran to enrich uranium. And the technology of uranium enrichment is something that, once learned, can be spread into places that we don't have access to, hidden from international inspectors, hidden from our own espionage capabilities. And under the illusion, and I think this is a very important point, that people said, well, they're only allowed to enrich to reactor-grade levels of the U-235 isotope, which are generally in the range of 3 to 5%, not to weapons-grade isotopes of U-235, which is 90%. That's a huge gap. It is not a huge gap. When you enrich to reactor-grade levels, you are doing 70%, 70% of the work you need to get to weapons-grade uranium. So people say now, oh, with the JCPOA violated, Iran has gone to 60% U-235. Well, that's maybe 85% of the way to weapons-grade. In other words, the key error, the original sin of the deal, was to allow Iran to have any uranium enrichment capability at all. And I would remind the German side that when the EU3 began the negotiation effort with Iran in 2003, they said as an absolute precondition that Iran can have civil nuclear reactors if it renounces both uranium enrichment and plutonium reprocessing from spent fuel, plutonium being the other route to nuclear weapons. And that line held until the Obama administration and John Kerry realized they're not going to have a deal with Iran unless they allow uranium enrichment. And they made that fatal concession, and it was all downhill from there.
Okay, but we could have an argument on this for hours because this is your diplomatic logic, and there's a diplomatic counter logic that argues that at this moment in crisis, now everybody's left with nothing. There's no agreement on ballistic missiles that could potentially be used. And I don't want to go further down that road because...
But you have to, because the notion that the agreement does anything is an illusion.
Okay, you simply don't believe that they do anything, and there's a counter-argument saying that they rein in.
Let me just remind you of what Winston Churchill once said. The only people that you can count on complying with arms control agreements are the people you don't need arms control agreements with.
Which is your philosophy as well, quite clearly. But I just want us to look at Ukraine and particularly NATO, as that NATO summit is coming up. And here, again, at the G7, we have the German Chancellor saying that everybody's on the same page over Ukraine. Let's just take a listen to that.
The fact remains, we will continue to provide military support to Ukraine. There is a consensus on this, not just in the European Union, but also in the G7.
Would you agree that there is a consensus on this? Or in other words, what do you expect to happen at the NATO summit, and what do you expect Donald Trump to do? And would you rule out him leaving NATO altogether over the next couple of days?
Well, I don't know what Trump will do at the NATO summit, and I'm not.
To his advisors.
I'm not dissatisfied by that because he doesn't know. That's next week. He'll decide when he gets there. I think the question of... Will
he really, though? Will he really decide once he gets there? I mean, honestly...
Will he get there is another question.
Yeah.
It's a good question, yeah. He doesn't like G7 meetings. I've been to 2 with him, and he didn't like either one particularly.
You said that is why he left the G7 early, right? Because he's
a good excuse. Sure.
He's not happy as a New Yorker in the mountains.
The possibility of him trying to withdraw from NATO remains very real. He almost did it in 2018, and I think it's a significant chance he could do it again. The question of whether the U.S. will continue to provide military assistance to Ukraine, weapons, ammunition, most importantly intelligence, I think is up in the air. I don't think we know the answer to that question.
So you say he goes from moment to moment. You would expect some kind of announcement of partial withdrawal. Do you think those medium-range missiles promised to Germany by 2026 will actually be stationed there, or do you think that's in question?
Well, I think with Trump, almost anything's in question from minute to minute. I think on Ukraine, which is a little bit more concrete, I think he will give up the diplomatic effort, which has manifestly failed. The issue is whether he will try to prevent Congress from appropriating additional funds for military assistance, and he would have pretty much control over the supply of intelligence assistance. And I just think that's unknown at this point.
I have 2 questions on this, if I may, Ambassador. Of course, the U.S. is also supplying Israel now, helping Israel in its efforts against Iran. How much of that is going to affect the U.S.'s supply to Ukraine?
I don't think that much. I think we're talking about 2 different categories of weapons, really.
But they do need the Patriots, for example. They do need resupply. They do need ammunition. Yeah.
Well, that goes to a larger question about the reduction of U.S. defense manufacturing capabilities. The West as a whole made a terrible mistake with the collapse of the Soviet Union. People were saying we had reached the end of history. People talked about the peace dividend. All Western countries, including the U.S., cut their defense budgets. It was a huge mistake at the time, and we're paying for it now.
And the other question that I have is that here in Europe, people are wondering, why is Donald Trump behaving like that? You say nobody knows. He doesn't even know himself. Do you think Donald Trump is a Russian asset?
No, I don't. I am his longest-serving national security advisor. And if I had seen anything in the 17 months I worked for him that suggested that, I think I would have remembered it. I don't see it. I think he is what Vladimir Lenin once reportedly called a useful idiot. He knows nothing of history. He's not concerned about it. He doesn't read briefing papers. He thinks that international relations, state-to-state relations, are embodied in the personal relationship between heads of state. So
whether somebody is his friend or not.
He thinks he and Vladimir Putin are friends. I can assure you that's not how Putin sees him. Trump thinks he and Xi Jinping are friends. That's not how Xi Jinping sees it, but it shows how they can manipulate him. After Trump met with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, in Singapore in 2018, he said, "We fell in love." I don't think that's how Kim Jong-un sees it. But this idea of the personal relationship, the ability to make a deal by looking at the party across the table and saying, "We'll make a deal," may work in Manhattan real estate, does not work internationally.
That all sounds very off the cuff, but there's a stark contrast to how he behaves on the world stage here. And as you described, this moment to moment, but then at home, sending Marines into Los Angeles, the dismantling of the democracy potentially in the United States. Who's behind that?
Yeah, let's stop for a moment here.
Yeah.
Right, let's take the deployment of the forces first. He federalized part of the California National Guard and sent in about 500 to 700 Marines.
Questioning court rulings. That's what I mean with questioning democracy.
I can only deal with one thing at a time. So I would not have done that. I don't think it was necessary in Los Angeles or anywhere else. But I do think it's within the president's authority. In 1957,
Gavin Newsom didn't think so.
Well, he's wrong, and he'll be proven wrong. He's just lost in the Ninth Circuit, which is the most liberal of the courts of appeal. He'll go to the Supreme Court, and he'll lose there. I've litigated cases about the president's authority over the National Guard when I was in the Justice Department. 1957, faced with a Supreme Court decision that told the South you had to end segregated schools. Arkansas, among other states, resisted.
There are two precedents.
Dwight Eisenhower federalized the Arkansas National Guard and sent in the 101st Airborne. No shade on the Marines, but the 101st is a pretty tough outfit, too. People say, well, that was a good decision because it was for the right reason. Well, that's not how the Southerners thought about it. So if you ask what's the president's authority to enforce federal law, it's pretty widespread.
But do you see him trying to extend that?
Dwight Eisenhower was not a threat to democracy.
But do you two observe him or see in his actions an attempt to extend his authority and also potentially into a third term? And who's behind that? Because that would be strategic.
He will not get a third term. He's already as much as admitted that. He was asked. He's named successors, potentially, Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. He knows that he can't get a third term. He'd like to rev his base up from time to time.
Steve Bannon keeps saying he will.
Yeah, because that benefits Steve Bannon, too. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to understand Trump will cause a lot of damage to the United States. He did in his first term. He will in his second term. To say it's an existential threat to democracy, however, is hysterical. And it makes it impossible to deal with what the real threat is.
But who do you think is going to come out as Donald Trump's potential successor out of the people in the Republican Party?
Well, I think it's very much up in the air. I think a lot depends on the state of the economy. If the tariffs, depending on what happens with the tariffs, kick in and there's a negative economic impact, as economists believe there will be, as our experience teaches us there will be, I think that will put a big negative on the whole idea of being affiliated with Donald Trump. I mean, you cannot foretell the 2028 election at this point.
I want to conclude with yes or no questions. Each of us gets a shot at a yes or no question. And my question to you to start off would be, are we on the brink of a much wider war, potentially a world war, as we're seeing events unfold in the Middle East?
We're on the brink of a wider war, but not World War III.
Richard? Yes or no question?
I just return to the last part of my question from earlier, Ambassador Bolton. Do you believe that the U.S. should embrace a three-way arms race with Russia and China and aim for a number of warheads in its nuclear weapons stockpile that equals Russia plus China?
Yes, we have to. It would be crazy not to. I mean, remember, deterrence worked during the Cold War by some of the most brilliant people in our country, creating structures of deterrence that prevented an exchange of nuclear salvos. All of that was based on bilateral standoff theory, two major nuclear powers. None of that applies in a tripolar nuclear world, which is what the Chinese are creating.
Speaking of deterrence, I just have one last question before we run out of time. But speaking of deterrence, your critics are saying that you weren't vocal enough in your criticism of Donald Trump's comments at the time of potentially withdrawing from NATO. Do you sometimes ask yourself, did I embolden Vladimir Putin?
No, of course not. If I can make any claim for what happened in NATO, is that I was one of those that helped keep the U.S. in it.
Well, thank you all. Now you're fully briefed up on the state of the world, which is indeed troubling, particularly looking at the Middle East at this moment in time. If you want updates on German politics and the world, don't forget the Berlin Briefing newsletter, and do drop us your comments what you would like to get briefed up on. Until next time, bye-bye.